To understand why Jessica's command for me to keep quiet at our family Thanksgiving dinner would result in such catastrophic consequences for everyone at that table, you need to understand exactly who Jessica Marie Rodriguez had become by the time she made her devastating mistake. Not the loving wife and devoted mother she pretended to be, but a calculating, image-obsessed control freak whose desperate need to appear perfect had transformed her into someone capable of extraordinary cruelty when she believed her vision of family success was being threatened. Jessica Elena Rodriguez was born in April 1987 in Phoenix, Arizona, the eldest daughter of Carlos Rodriguez, a successful real estate developer, and Maria Rodriguez, who had built a thriving interior design business catering to affluent clients throughout the Southwest. From her earliest memories, Jessica's life had been defined by the constant pressure to maintain appearances, achieve perfection, and represent the family's success through her behavior, accomplishments, and social connections. Unlike many children who develop their sense of self through play, exploration, and genuine relationships, Jessica's childhood had been structured around performance and image management. Her parents' social and business success depended heavily on their reputation within Phoenix's competitive upper-middle-class community, and Jessica had been trained from an early age to understand that her behavior reflected directly on the family's standing and future opportunities. The Rodriguez family lived in a pristine adobe-style home in an exclusive gated community, where every detail from the landscaping to the interior decor was carefully chosen to project success, sophistication, and cultural authenticity. Jessica's bedroom was photographed for a lifestyle magazine when she was 12, showcasing her parents' ability to create spaces that were both beautiful and functional for their successful family. But beneath the magazine-worthy exterior, Jessica's childhood was characterized by relentless pressure to excel academically, socially, and personally, in ways that would enhance the family's reputation and create opportunities for continued advancement. Her parents monitored her grades, her friendships, her extracurricular activities, and even her appearance with the kind of detailed attention that most families reserved for business ventures or professional projects. Jessica's academic performance was tracked and analyzed like a stock portfolio, with her parents hiring tutors, educational consultants, and test preparation specialists to ensure that she maintained the kind of academic excellence that would guarantee admission to prestigious universities and access to elite social circles. Her social activities were carefully curated to ensure that she associated with children from families that could provide valuable connections and opportunities. Even Jessica's hobbies and interests were evaluated based on their potential to enhance her college applications and social standing. She was enrolled in piano lessons not because she showed musical talent or interest, but because classical music training was considered essential for well-rounded, sophisticated young women. She participated in competitive horseback riding not because she loved horses, but because equestrian skills were associated with upper-class culture and would distinguish her from children whose families couldn't afford such expensive activities. This approach to childhood and adolescence created a young woman who was exceptionally skilled at identifying and meeting external expectations, but who had never developed a genuine sense of personal identity or authentic relationships. Jessica learned to evaluate every situation, relationship, and opportunity based on how it might affect her image and social standing, rather than how it might contribute to her happiness, growth, or fulfillment. The psychological foundation that would define Jessica's entire approach to adult relationships was her learned belief that love, acceptance, and security were conditional on performance and image, rather than on genuine connection and mutual support. She had internalized the message that her worth was determined by how well she could represent success, sophistication, and perfection to the outside world. During high school, Jessica's performance-based approach to relationships became increasingly sophisticated and calculating. She would maintain friendships with people who enhanced her social status, while distancing herself from anyone who might be considered less desirable or potentially embarrassing. She would participate in activities that looked impressive on college applications, rather than pursuing genuine interests or passions. Jessica's approach to dating during high school and college was particularly revealing of her transactional mindset. She would evaluate potential romantic partners based on their academic achievements, family backgrounds, social connections, and future earning potential, rather than on compatibility, shared values, or genuine attraction. She understood intuitively that choosing the right romantic partner was one of the most important decisions she could make for her long-term success and social standing. The strategy worked exactly as Jessica had planned. She graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in communications and a minor in business administration, achievements that reflected her focus on developing skills that would be useful for managing image and social dynamics rather than building expertise in any particular field. Her academic record was impressive enough to open doors to good entry-level positions, but not so specialized that it would limit her options for adapting to whatever opportunities might arise. But perhaps more importantly, Jessica's college experience had provided her with extensive practice in the kind of social manipulation and image management that would be essential for achieving her long-term goals. She had learned to present different versions of herself depending on what seemed most likely to appeal to different audiences, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit other people's insecurities and desires. After graduation, Jessica had moved to Seattle specifically because she had identified the Pacific Northwest as a region where an attractive, well-educated young woman could build a successful career and establish valuable social connections. Seattle's combination of tech industry wealth, cultural sophistication, and environmental consciousness appealed to Jessica's sense of what constituted the ideal location for someone with her ambitions and image. Jessica's first job in Seattle was as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm, a position that allowed her to observe successful professionals and learn about the social dynamics that governed advancement in corporate environments. She was particularly interested in understanding how successful women managed their careers, relationships, and public images to achieve the kind of lifestyle and social standing that she wanted for herself. But Jessica's real education during this period came from her careful observation of her colleagues' marriages and family relationships. She studied how successful women balanced career demands with family responsibilities, how they managed their children's education and social development, and how they used family activities and social connections to enhance their professional and social standing. The pattern that emerged from Jessica's observations was that the most successful women were those who had married men with strong earning potential and social connections, and who had then used their roles as wives and mothers to build impressive family brands that enhanced everyone's reputation and opportunities. These women understood that modern success required creating family images that projected achievement, sophistication, and values that would appeal to other successful families. Jessica's analysis of successful Seattle families revealed that the most impressive families were those that appeared to have achieved the perfect balance between traditional values and contemporary sophistication. They maintained close family relationships while also pursuing individual achievements. They honored their cultural heritage while also embracing modern approaches to parenting and career development. They demonstrated financial success while also showing commitment to social responsibility and community involvement. This research provided Jessica with a clear template for the kind of family she wanted to create and the kind of man she needed to marry to achieve her goals. She was looking for someone who was financially successful, but not so wealthy that she would be overshadowed by his achievements. She wanted someone who came from a stable, respectable family, but who would also be open to modernizing traditional approaches to family relationships. When Jessica met Robert Mitchell at a professional networking event in 2016, she recognized immediately that he represented exactly the kind of opportunity she had been preparing for throughout her 20s. Robert was handsome, successful, and obviously from a stable family background. He worked as a senior project manager for a major construction company, earning a comfortable salary with excellent benefits and strong potential for advancement. But perhaps more importantly, Robert seemed to represent the kind of genuine, caring man who would value the supportive, nurturing partnership that Jessica had learned to project. He talked about his family with obvious affection and respect, mentioning his mother's wisdom and his siblings' achievements in ways that suggested he came from the kind of close, traditional family that Jessica believed would provide the perfect foundation for building the impressive family brand she envisioned. Jessica's courtship strategy with Robert was her most sophisticated performance to date, requiring her to maintain a complex persona that projected warmth, authenticity, and traditional values, while actually being completely focused on achieving her strategic goals. She presented herself as someone who valued family relationships and traditional approaches to love and commitment, when in reality, she was conducting a careful evaluation of Robert's long-term potential as a partner in her family-building project. The deception required Jessica to develop extensive knowledge about Robert's interests, values, and family background so that she could present herself as someone who shared his priorities and would fit seamlessly into his existing relationships. She studied his family's traditions, learned about his mother's church involvement, and even researched the Mitchell family's history in the Pacific Northwest to demonstrate her genuine interest in becoming part of their legacy. But beneath Jessica's carefully constructed performance, she was actually conducting her own investigation into Robert's financial situation, family dynamics, and potential for advancement. She analyzed his career trajectory, researched his company's growth prospects, and even made subtle inquiries about his family's financial stability and inheritance potential. This background research revealed that Robert earned approximately $90,000 annually as a senior project manager, with a 401k account, health insurance, and other benefits that suggested financial stability and responsibility. His family owned a modest but well-maintained home in a respectable neighborhood, and his siblings had all achieved middle-class success through education and hard work. While Robert's financial situation was comfortable rather than luxurious, Jessica's research had also revealed that his family represented exactly the kind of stable, traditional foundation that could provide the perfect platform for her family-building ambitions. The Mitchell family's reputation for integrity, their strong community connections, and their obvious commitment to supporting each other's success suggested that marrying into this family would provide Jessica with the kind of social capital and emotional security that money alone couldn't purchase. The contradiction between Jessica's stated values and her actual approach to relationships was most evident during their engagement period, when she began to reveal her true priorities and expectations for their future together. While Jessica continued to express appreciation for Robert's family and their traditions, she also began to suggest ways that those traditions might be updated or modernized to better reflect contemporary approaches to family relationships. Jessica's suggestions were always framed as helpful improvements rather than criticisms, but they revealed her fundamental belief that the Mitchell family's traditional approaches to relationships and celebrations were outdated and potentially embarrassing. She would praise the family's closeness while suggesting that they might benefit from healthier boundaries and more individual space. She would express admiration for the family's traditions while recommending fresh approaches that might be more appealing to younger generations. The most revealing aspect of Jessica's approach was her subtle but persistent criticism of my role in the family and her suggestions for how my involvement might be adjusted to better serve everyone's needs. She would express respect for my dedication to the family while suggesting that my old-fashioned approaches might be preventing other family members from developing more independent relationship skills. "Robert, your mother is so sweet and obviously loves everyone so much," Jessica would say during their private conversations, "but I sometimes wonder if she might be a little too involved in everyone's business. It might be healthier for the family if people felt more comfortable handling their own problems without always turning to her for advice." The phrase "too involved" was particularly revealing because it demonstrated that Jessica interpreted my role as the family's emotional anchor as interference rather than support. In her worldview, healthy families were composed of independent individuals who maintained polite but distant relationships, not intimate networks of mutual support and shared responsibility. Jessica's criticism of my involvement in family relationships was actually a criticism of the entire foundation that had held the Mitchell family together for decades. She was essentially arguing that the emotional intimacy, mutual support, and shared problem-solving that had characterized our family culture were unhealthy and outdated, and that modern families should prioritize individual autonomy over collective care and responsibility. But Jessica's vision of a healthier family dynamic was actually a vision of a family that would be easier for her to control and manage according to her own priorities and image goals. She wanted to be part of a family that looked successful and sophisticated from the outside, But she didn't want to deal with the emotional complexity and time investment that genuine intimacy and mutual support required. The wedding planning process provided the first clear indication of Jessica's true priorities and her willingness to sacrifice genuine relationships for image management. While Jessica claimed to value family traditions and authentic relationships, she planned their wedding as a carefully orchestrated performance designed to establish her social status and demonstrate her ability to create impressive events. Jessica's vision for their wedding was a 200-guest celebration that would cost over $40,000 and would showcase her taste, organizational skills, and ability to bring together successful, attractive people in beautiful settings. She wanted professional photography that would create images suitable for social media and potential magazine coverage. She wanted catering that would impress guests and demonstrate her sophisticated palate and cultural awareness. But perhaps most revealing was Jessica's approach to the guest list, which she managed like a strategic networking opportunity rather than a celebration of relationships that mattered to her and Robert. She would evaluate potential guests based on their social standing, professional achievements, and potential value for future networking, rather than on their importance to her and Robert's happiness and support system. The family members who received prominent roles in Jessica's wedding were those who looked impressive in photographs and who could contribute to the sophisticated image she was trying to create. Family members who didn't meet her standards for appearance, social standing, or contemporary sophistication were assigned less visible roles or were excluded entirely from key events and photographs. My role in Jessica's wedding was particularly revealing of her approach to family relationships and image management. While she couldn't exclude me entirely without creating obvious family conflict, she carefully managed my involvement to minimize any potential impact on the sophisticated image she was creating. I was assigned a seat at a table with other elderly relatives, away from the head table, where Jessica's more impressive family members and friends would be prominently displayed. The wedding itself was beautiful and successful in achieving Jessica's goal of creating an impressive debut as Robert's wife and the newest member of the Mitchell family. But the aftermath revealed the fundamental problems with Jessica's approach to relationships and her willingness to sacrifice authenticity for image management. The $40,000 wedding had consumed most of Robert's savings and had required him to take on debt that would constrain their lifestyle for years to come. But rather than acknowledging the financial burden her demands had created, Jessica immediately began planning for the next phase of her family-building project, which involved establishing their home, developing their social presence, and beginning the process of having children who would enhance their family brand. Jessica's approach to setting up their household revealed her continued focus on image management rather than genuine comfort or authentic self-expression. She decorated their apartment with furniture and accessories that looked impressive in photographs and would impress visitors, rather than choosing items that reflected their actual tastes or needs. She selected colors, patterns, and styles that projected sophistication and success, rather than creating a comfortable, welcoming environment. But perhaps most significantly, Jessica began the process of systematically restructuring Robert's family relationships to better align with her vision of what a successful, modern family should look like. She started by suggesting small changes to family traditions and gatherings, always framing her recommendations as improvements that would make events more enjoyable and contemporary. Jessica's suggestions were subtle but persistent, focusing on ways that family gatherings could be made more efficient and enjoyable by reducing the time spent on outdated activities and increasing the focus on meaningful conversations and quality time. She recommended that family dinners be shorter and more focused, with less emphasis on extensive meal preparation and more emphasis on catching up in structured, organized ways. The underlying message of Jessica's suggestions was that the Mitchell family's traditional approaches to spending time together were inefficient and potentially burdensome, and that modern families should prioritize convenience and individual preferences over time-intensive expressions of care and connection. But Jessica's most significant intervention was her gradual campaign to reduce my influence in family decision-making, and to reposition herself as the family's new voice of contemporary wisdom and sophisticated guidance. She would politely but firmly redirect conversations when I offered advice or shared perspectives, suggesting that times have changed and that modern approaches might be more appropriate for current challenges. Jessica's strategy was always respectful and diplomatic, but it was clearly designed to establish her as the family's expert on contemporary life, while positioning me as someone whose perspectives, while well-intentioned, were no longer relevant or helpful for addressing modern problems and opportunities. The most troubling aspect of Jessica's approach was her systematic devaluation of the emotional intelligence and relationship skills that had made me central to the family's stability and happiness. She would dismiss my insights about family dynamics as old-fashioned, and would suggest that my approach to relationships was too intense or too involved for healthy modern families. "I think Eleanor means well," Jessica would say during private conversations with Robert, "but her generation has different ideas about boundaries and privacy. It might be better for everyone if she understood that people today prefer to handle their own problems without so much family involvement." Quote. The phrase "people today" was particularly revealing because it suggested that Jessica viewed herself as representative of contemporary values and modern approaches to relationships, while positioning me as someone whose perspectives were outdated and potentially harmful to family members who were trying to live according to current standards. Jessica's criticism of my approach to family relationships was actually a criticism of the entire foundation of emotional intimacy and mutual support that had made the Mitchell family resilient and successful for decades. She was arguing that the very qualities that had enabled us to help each other through challenges and celebrate each other's successes were actually obstacles to healthy modern family functioning. But Jessica's vision of healthy modern family functioning was actually a vision of relationships that would be easier for her to manage and control according to her own priorities and image goals. She wanted to be part of a family that looked successful and sophisticated from the outside, but she didn't want to invest the time, emotional energy, and vulnerability that genuine intimacy and mutual support required. The tragic irony was that Jessica's systematic campaign to modernize and improve the Mitchell family was actually destroying the very qualities that had made our family strong, stable, and genuinely supportive of each other's happiness and success. Her focus on efficiency, boundaries, and contemporary approaches was creating distance, reducing communication, and eliminating the informal support systems that had helped family members navigate challenges successfully for years. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Jessica's approach was her complete failure to understand that the information, insights, and emotional connections she was trying to eliminate were actually the foundation of the family's stability and her own security within it. She was systematically alienating the person who knew everyone's secrets, who understood the family's dynamics better than anyone else, and who had the power to expose the vulnerabilities and problems that everyone was trying to hide. Jessica was creating a situation where the person who possessed the most comprehensive and potentially damaging information about every family member was also the person who was being increasingly marginalized, dismissed, and treated with disrespect. She was transforming the family's greatest source of wisdom and support into someone who had every reason to feel hurt, unappreciated, and potentially vengeful. The stage was set for Jessica to discover that her campaign to modernize the Mitchell family had created exactly the kind of dangerous situation that her image-obsessed approach to relationships was supposed to prevent. She was about to learn that dismissing someone who appears powerless but actually possesses comprehensive knowledge of everyone's secrets is the kind of strategic mistake that can destroy everything she had worked to build. The woman she thought she could silence and control was actually the keeper of every piece of information that could expose the gap between the Mitchell family's public image and their private reality, and Jessica's condescending treatment had just given me permission to stop protecting the very people who had been allowing her to take my discretion and loyalty for granted. Justice was coming to Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell, and it was going to be delivered by someone who understood exactly how to use the truth to destroy the carefully constructed facade that had become more important to her than the genuine relationships that had created it. What my son's wife, Jessica, didn't know when she told me to keep quiet and let the adults handle important conversations at our family Thanksgiving dinner was that I had spent the last 15 years quietly collecting every dirty secret, hidden affair, financial scandal, and buried shame that every person at that table had been desperately trying to hide. And this time, I was going to use every devastating piece of information I'd accumulated to show her that silencing a 70-year-old woman who had been the family's invisible confidant for decades was the most catastrophic mistake of her controlling, manipulative existence. Before I tell you how my own son's wife learned that dismissing someone who looks like a harmless grandmother can destroy your entire family's reputation and relationships in a single evening, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story of family secrets and perfectly orchestrated revenge resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have another incredible story of underestimated power that will absolutely blow your mind. My name is Eleanor Ellie Mitchell. I'm 73 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my daughter-in-law Jessica, a woman who had spent 5 years trying to control every aspect of our family gatherings, thought she could silence me like a child at my own son's dinner table, only to discover that the quiet, gentle woman she saw as an outdated nuisance was actually the keeper of every secret that could destroy the carefully constructed lives of everyone in that room. You see, when people look at me today, they see exactly what Jessica saw that November evening, a petite 73-year-old woman with soft white curls that I style myself every Tuesday at the local beauty shop, wearing a simple floral dress from JCPenney that cost $28 on clearance, speaking in the gentle voice that comes from decades of listening more than talking. They see someone who knits cable knit sweaters for grandchildren during long winter evenings, bakes chocolate chip cookies for church functions every third Sunday, and represents a bygone era of women who were supposed to be seen and not heard. My appearance reinforces every stereotype about elderly women in small-town America. I drive a 12-year-old Honda Accord with a "Proud Grandma" bumper sticker and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. My handbag is a practical black leather purse that I've carried for 8 years, containing reading glasses, peppermint candies, wallet photos of my grandchildren, and a small notebook where I write down grocery lists and appointment reminders. My jewelry consists of my simple gold wedding band that I've worn for 51 years, small pearl earrings that were my mother's, and a delicate cross necklace that my late husband Thomas gave me for our 25th anniversary. When I walk into a room, people instinctively lower their voices and adjust their language, assuming that someone who looks like their grandmother from the 1950s might be easily shocked or offended by modern conversation. Store clerks speak to me slowly and loudly, as if my age automatically implies hearing problems or cognitive decline. Restaurant servers recommend the early bird specials and ask if I need help reading the menu. Medical receptionists automatically assume I'll need assistance with electronic forms or insurance paperwork. This treatment isn't malicious. It's simply the unconscious response that most people have to elderly women who embody traditional feminine roles and modest presentation. Society has trained people to see women like me as harmless, irrelevant, and essentially invisible beyond our roles as mothers, grandmothers, and church volunteers. We're expected to be grateful for small kindnesses, patient with condescension, and understanding when younger people dismiss our opinions as outdated or irrelevant. Jessica had been seeing me this way for the past 5 years, ever since she married my son Robert, and moved into what she assumed was a traditional family that would allow her to establish herself as the new matriarch who could modernize our supposedly outdated ways. She would watch me arrive at family gatherings in my older Honda Accord, carrying homemade casseroles and glass dishes that I've used for 30 years, and she would respond with barely concealed impatience for what she interpreted as my old-fashioned approach to family relationships and social situations. From Jessica's perspective, I represented everything she was trying to evolve beyond in her vision of a modern, sophisticated family. My homemade contributions to family dinners seemed quaint and unnecessary when she preferred catered food or restaurant takeout. My gentle questions about family members' lives seemed invasive when she believed in giving people space and respecting boundaries. My traditions of birthday cards, holiday decorations, and anniversary celebrations seemed burdensome when she preferred low-key, casual approaches to family milestones. Most revealing was Jessica's response to my gift-giving style and holiday traditions. I would spend months knitting sweaters for grandchildren, choosing colors carefully and adjusting sizes as they grew. I would bake cookies for Christmas, Easter, and birthdays, using recipes that had been passed down through 3 generations of Mitchell women. I would remember every anniversary, graduation, and special occasion with carefully chosen cards and thoughtful presents that reflected genuine knowledge of each family member's interests and needs. Jessica's reaction to these gestures was polite appreciation, mixed with obvious discomfort. She would thank me graciously, but would make subtle comments about how lucky I was to have so much free time for all these little projects. She would praise my baking while suggesting that store-bought is just as good these days and that people don't expect homemade everything anymore. She would express appreciation for my knitted gifts while mentioning that the kids might prefer gift cards or something they can pick out themselves. The subtext of these comments was clear. My traditional expressions of love and care were outdated, burdensome, and potentially embarrassing in a modern family context. Jessica wanted to be part of a family that expressed affection through efficient, contemporary methods rather than time-intensive, old-fashioned gestures that might seem excessive or inappropriate to their social circle. But Jessica's discomfort with my traditional approach to family relationships extended far beyond gift-giving and holiday celebrations. She seemed genuinely puzzled by my habit of calling family members regularly just to check on their well-being, asking about their jobs, their health, their relationships, and their daily experiences. In Jessica's worldview, this level of ongoing interest in family members' lives was intrusive rather than caring, and she would often make comments about the importance of, quote, respecting people's privacy and not being too involved in others' business. The irony was that Jessica's preference for respecting boundaries and giving people space was actually creating distance and isolation within our family, while my supposedly outdated approach to staying connected was what kept us informed about each other's lives and available to provide support when needed. But Jessica interpreted my genuine interest in family members' welfare as nosiness, and my desire to maintain close relationships as an inability to understand modern family dynamics. This fundamental misunderstanding of my role in the family was most evident during our monthly family dinners, which had been a Mitchell tradition for over 20 years. These gatherings had originally been informal opportunities for extended family to share meals, catch up on news, and maintain the connections that kept us close, despite busy schedules and geographical distances. The dinners rotated between family members' homes, with each host providing the main course, while others contributed sides, desserts, and drinks. My role in these gatherings had evolved naturally over the years into that of the family's unofficial coordinator and emotional anchor. I would call family members to confirm attendance, coordinate the menu contributions, and ensure that everyone felt included and welcome. During the dinners themselves, I would move quietly between conversations, checking on family members who seemed stressed or troubled, and creating opportunities for shy or introverted relatives to participate in group discussions. But perhaps most importantly, I had become the family's informal counselor and confidant, the person that family members sought out when they needed someone safe to talk to about problems, concerns, or difficult decisions. My gentle, non-judgmental approach to listening, combined with my obvious love for all family members and my reputation for absolute discretion, had made me the repository for secrets, worries, and private struggles that people couldn't share with anyone else. Over the past 15 years, I had listened to confessions about marital problems, financial difficulties, health scares, career disappointments, and personal conflicts that would have destroyed relationships and family harmony if they had been shared with the wrong people. My children and their spouses had learned to trust me with their darkest moments, because they knew I would never betray their confidence, never use their vulnerabilities against them, and never judge them for their mistakes or failures. My son Robert had confided in me about his struggles with work-related stress and his fears about his ability to provide for his family during economic uncertainty. My daughter Sarah had shared her concerns about her teenager's behavioral problems and her guilt about her parenting choices. My younger son Michael had told me about his marital difficulties and his confusion about whether his marriage could be saved. But the secrets I kept weren't limited to my immediate children. Their spouses, my grandchildren, and even family friends had gradually learned that I was someone who could be trusted with sensitive information and who would provide comfort and guidance without creating drama or gossip. Jessica's sister had confided in me about her husband's gambling problem. My grandson had shared his anxiety about college applications and his fears about disappointing his parents. Even Robert's business partner had sought my advice about a difficult ethical situation at work. The accumulation of these secrets over 15 years had given me a comprehensive understanding of our family's dynamics, relationships, and hidden tensions that no one else possessed. I knew which marriages were struggling, which family members were having financial problems, which teenagers were experimenting with substances, which adults were having affairs, and which seemingly successful people were dealing with depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges. This knowledge wasn't something I had sought or wanted. It had simply been the natural result of being the kind of person that others felt safe confiding in. My gentle demeanor, my obvious love for family members, and my reputation for discretion had made me the informal family therapist, the person people turned to when they needed someone to listen without judgment or interference. But Jessica had completely misunderstood my role in the family and the reasons why people confided in me. She interpreted my knowledge of family members' private struggles as nosiness, and my position as the family's emotional anchor as an outdated attempt to maintain control over relationships that should be more independent and contemporary. She seemed to believe that healthy families should respect each other's privacy and avoid the kind of intimate knowledge that had made me central to our family's emotional stability. Jessica's misunderstanding of my role was particularly evident in her response to family members who would seek me out during gatherings to share concerns or ask for advice. She would watch these conversations with obvious disapproval, making comments about how people need to learn to handle their own problems, and how it's not healthy to be so dependent on family members for emotional support. The phrase "so dependent" was particularly revealing because it demonstrated that Jessica viewed emotional intimacy and mutual support as weaknesses rather than strengths. In her worldview, healthy adults should be self-sufficient and shouldn't need the kind of ongoing family involvement that had characterized the Mitchell family for generations. This perspective was fundamentally incompatible with the values and traditions that had held our family together through decades of challenges, celebrations, and changes. The Mitchell family had always believed that strong families were built on mutual support, open communication, and the understanding that family members were always available to help each other through difficult times. But Jessica's vision of a modern, sophisticated family emphasized independence, privacy, and emotional restraint, rather than the intimacy and mutual dependence that had been central to our family's culture. She wanted to be part of a family that looked successful and contemporary from the outside, rather than one that prioritized emotional connection and genuine care for each other's welfare. This fundamental difference in values had created increasing tension in our family gatherings over the past 5 years, as Jessica gradually began to challenge the traditions, expectations, and dynamics that had defined our family culture for decades. She would make subtle comments about how times have changed and how families today handled things differently than previous generations. The most troubling aspect of Jessica's approach was her increasing attempts to limit my involvement in family discussions and decision-making. She would interrupt conversations where I was providing advice or sharing perspectives, redirecting discussions toward topics she considered more appropriate or contemporary. She would make comments about how older generations might not understand modern challenges or current approaches to problems. These interventions were always subtle and polite, but they were clearly designed to marginalize my influence and establish Jessica as the family's new voice of reason and contemporary wisdom. She seemed to believe that my traditional approach to family relationships was holding everyone back from healthier, more modern patterns of interaction. But Jessica's attempts to modernize our family dynamics were actually creating the opposite effect. Instead of promoting independence and healthy boundaries, her approach was creating distance, reducing communication, and eliminating the support systems that had helped family members navigate challenges successfully for years. Family members were beginning to feel isolated and disconnected from each other, unsure about when it was appropriate to share concerns or ask for help. The informal network of mutual support that had characterized our family was being replaced by a more formal, distant approach that left people feeling like they had to handle problems alone, rather than relying on family resources and wisdom. The impact of these changes was most evident in the younger generation, who were losing access to the guidance and support that had helped their parents and grandparents navigate similar challenges in previous decades. Instead of learning from family experience and wisdom, they were being encouraged to figure things out independently, even when their struggles were identical to problems that other family members had already solved. My grandchildren were particularly affected by these changes, as they were losing the opportunity to develop close relationships with extended family members who could provide different perspectives, support, and guidance than their immediate parents. The informal mentorship and emotional support that had been available to previous generations was being replaced by a more limited, nuclear family approach that reduced the resources available to help young people navigate the challenges of growing up. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Jessica's approach was her failure to understand that family secrets and private struggles don't disappear when families adopt more contemporary approaches to relationships. The problems, conflicts, and challenges that I had been helping family members address for years were still present, but now family members were dealing with them in isolation rather than with the support and guidance that had previously been available. This meant that the comprehensive knowledge I had accumulated over 15 years of serving as the family's confidant was still relevant and potentially explosive, but now it was being held by someone who was being systematically excluded from family decision-making and treated as an outdated obstacle to family progress. Jessica had created a situation where the person who knew everyone's secrets was also the person who was being dismissed, marginalized, and treated with increasing disrespect. She had transformed the family's greatest source of emotional support and wisdom into someone who had every reason to feel hurt, unappreciated, and potentially vengeful. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the fundamental flaws in Jessica's approach to family relationships and demonstrate the dangerous consequences of dismissing people who appear powerless but actually possess comprehensive knowledge of everyone's vulnerabilities and mistakes. Jessica was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person at the dinner table is the one who looks like they couldn't possibly hurt you, and that silencing someone who has spent 15 years listening to everyone's secrets is the kind of mistake that can destroy a family's carefully constructed facade in a single evening. The woman she thought she could dismiss as just another outdated grandmother was actually the keeper of every piece of damaging information that could expose the truth about who everyone really was beneath their public personas, and Jessica's condescending treatment had just given me permission to stop protecting the very people who had been taking my discretion and loyalty for granted. Justice was coming to the Mitchell family dinner table, and it was going to be more devastating than anyone could have imagined. To understand how Jessica's command for me to keep quiet at our family dinner would trigger such a comprehensive disaster for everyone present, you need to understand the specific ways that my relationship with Jessica had deteriorated over 5 years of marriage, and how her systematic campaign to diminish my role in the family had created exactly the kind of dangerous dynamic that her image-obsessed approach to relationships was supposed to prevent. The early days of Jessica's relationship with Robert had been characterized by what I now recognize as a carefully orchestrated performance of respect, appreciation, and genuine interest in becoming part of our family. During their courtship period, Jessica had presented herself as someone who valued family traditions, respected elder wisdom, and was genuinely excited about the opportunity to build meaningful relationships with Robert's relatives. Jessica's initial approach to our relationship was sophisticated and strategic, designed to establish her as someone who appreciated my role in the family while also positioning herself as a worthy addition to our family dynamic. She would ask thoughtful questions about family history, express genuine interest in my experiences and perspectives, and demonstrate respect for the traditions and values that had shaped the Mitchell family for generations. "Mrs. Mitchell, I would love to hear more about how you and Robert's father met," Jessica would say during their early family gatherings, settling beside me with the kind of focused attention that suggested she found my stories genuinely fascinating. "Robert has told me some wonderful stories about his childhood, and I can tell that you played such an important role in creating the kind of family that produced someone as caring and grounded as he is." These conversations were carefully structured to flatter me while also gathering information about family dynamics, traditions, and expectations that would help Jessica understand how to position herself successfully within our existing relationships. She would ask about my approach to parenting, my philosophy about family relationships, and my thoughts about how families could maintain closeness while also supporting individual growth and achievement. The questions were intelligent and respectful, creating the impression that Jessica was someone who valued wisdom and experience rather than someone who assumed that contemporary approaches were automatically superior to traditional methods. She seemed to understand that successful families were built on accumulated knowledge and tested principles rather than on theoretical ideas about what relationships should look like. But perhaps most importantly, Jessica's early interactions with me demonstrated apparent appreciation for my role as the family's emotional anchor and informal counselor. She would observe how family members sought my advice and support during gatherings, and she would express admiration for my ability to help people feel comfortable and supported during difficult conversations. "It's so wonderful how everyone feels comfortable talking to you about their problems," Jessica observed during one of our early conversations. "You have such a gift for helping people feel heard and understood. I can see why Robert's family is so close and supportive of each other." The phrase "such a gift" was particularly significant because it suggested that Jessica recognized my emotional intelligence and relationship skills as valuable assets rather than as outdated approaches to family dynamics. She seemed to understand that my ability to listen without judgment and provide guidance without interference was central to our family's stability and happiness. During their engagement period, Jessica's appreciation for my role in the family had extended to specific requests for advice and support, with wedding planning, family integration, and her own adjustment to becoming part of the Mitchell family culture. She would seek my input on decisions about traditions, celebrations, and family dynamics, treating me as someone whose experience and wisdom were essential for her success as Robert's wife. "I want to make sure I'm approaching this the right way," Jessica had said during one of our conversations about wedding planning. "Your family has such beautiful traditions, and I want to honor what's important to everyone, while also creating something that feels authentic to Robert and me. What do you think would be most meaningful to family members?" Quote, "These conversations had created the impression that Jessica was someone who understood the importance of balance between innovation and tradition, someone who could appreciate existing family strengths while also contributing fresh perspectives and contemporary insights. She seemed to recognize that successful family relationships required both continuity and adaptation, and that the most effective changes were those that enhanced existing strengths rather than replacing them entirely. But the most convincing aspect of Jessica's early performance was her apparent understanding of the emotional labor and relationship maintenance that kept families connected and supportive. She would observe how I coordinated family gatherings, maintained communication between family members, and provided the kind of ongoing emotional support that prevented small problems from becoming major conflicts. "I'm amazed by how much work goes into keeping everyone connected and informed," Jessica had commented during one of our family dinners. "It's like you're the family's informal communications coordinator and emotional support system all rolled into one. I hope I can learn to contribute to that kind of family harmony." The phrase, "learn to contribute," was particularly revealing because it suggested that Jessica recognized family harmony as something that required active effort and developed skills, rather than something that happened automatically when people shared DNA and good intentions. She seemed to understand that my role in the family was the result of years of practice, emotional intelligence, and genuine commitment to everyone's welfare. These early interactions had created a foundation of mutual respect and appreciation that made Jessica's later transformation particularly shocking and hurtful. During their engagement and early marriage, she had demonstrated understanding of my value to the family, and had expressed gratitude for my willingness to share my knowledge and experience with someone who was still learning how to navigate Mitchell family dynamics. But the first signs of Jessica's changing attitude toward me had emerged during their honeymoon period, when she began to express subtle criticisms of family traditions and practices that she had previously praised. The criticisms were always framed as observations about potential improvements rather than direct complaints, but they revealed a fundamental shift in her perspective about what constituted healthy family relationships. "I love how close your family is," Jessica had said to Robert during one of their early conversations after returning from their honeymoon. "But I sometimes wonder if people might benefit from a little more independence and personal space. It seems like everyone is so used to checking in with your mother about everything that they might not be developing their own decision-making skills." The phrase "checking in with your mother" was particularly significant because it reframed my role as the family's emotional anchor as something that was potentially limiting other family members' growth and autonomy. Jessica was suggesting that the very qualities that had made our family strong and supportive might actually be preventing people from developing the independence and self-reliance that were necessary for healthy adult relationships. This reframing of my role represented a fundamental shift in Jessica's understanding of family dynamics and her assessment of what constituted healthy relationships. During their courtship, she had praised my ability to provide guidance and support as evidence of the family's emotional intelligence and mutual care. Now she was suggesting that the same behaviors were potentially problematic and might be interfering with family members' personal development. The transformation was gradual but persistent, with Jessica making increasingly frequent comments about the importance of boundaries, independence, and personal growth, in ways that implicitly criticized the intimacy and mutual dependence that had characterized Mitchell family relationships for decades. She would express concern about family members who seemed too dependent on family support, and would suggest that healthier relationships required more individual autonomy and less collective decision-making. "I think it's wonderful that your family cares so much about each other," Jessica would say during private conversations with Robert, "but I sometimes worry that people aren't learning to handle their own challenges independently. It might be better for everyone if they felt more comfortable making decisions without always needing family input and approval." Quote, the phrase, "always needing family input," was particularly revealing because it suggested that Jessica viewed the collaborative decision-making and mutual support that had been central to our family culture as signs of weakness or immaturity rather than as evidence of wisdom and emotional intelligence. She was implying that healthy adults should be able to handle problems independently, without relying on family resources and experience. Jessica's criticism of our family's collaborative approach to problem-solving was actually a criticism of one of our greatest strengths and most valuable characteristics. The Mitchell family had survived decades of challenges, celebrated numerous successes, and maintained strong relationships precisely because we understood that collective wisdom and mutual support were more effective than individual struggle and isolated decision-making. But Jessica's contemporary perspective on family relationships emphasized individual autonomy and personal boundaries in ways that were fundamentally incompatible with the intimacy and mutual dependence that had made our family resilient and successful. She was advocating for a more distant, formal approach to family relationships that would reduce the emotional complexity and time investment required for genuine intimacy and mutual support. The most troubling aspect of Jessica's evolving criticism was her increasing focus on my role specifically and her suggestions for how my involvement in family dynamics might be adjusted to better serve everyone's needs. She would express appreciation for my good intentions, while suggesting that my approach to family relationships was old-fashioned and might be preventing other family members from developing more contemporary relationship skills. "Your mother obviously loves everyone and wants to be helpful," Jessica would tell Robert during their private conversations, "but I think her generation has different ideas about privacy and boundaries than people do today. It might be healthier for everyone if she understood that modern families prefer to handle their own problems without so much involvement from extended family." The phrase "so much involvement" was particularly hurtful because it reframed my lifetime of service to the family as interference rather than support. Jessica was suggesting that the very qualities that had made me valuable to family members for decades were actually problematic and potentially harmful to their development and happiness. This reframing of my role was not only inaccurate but also strategically dangerous for Jessica's own goals and security within the family. She was systematically alienating the person who had been most responsible for maintaining family harmony and emotional stability, and she was doing so without understanding the consequences of eliminating the informal support systems that had kept family relationships strong and conflicts manageable. Jessica's campaign to reduce my influence in family decision-making began with subtle interventions during family gatherings, where she would politely but firmly redirect conversations when I offered advice or shared perspectives. She would suggest that times have changed, and that modern approaches might be more appropriate for current challenges, positioning herself as someone who understood contemporary solutions, while implying that my perspectives were outdated and potentially counterproductive. The interventions were always respectful and diplomatic, but they were clearly designed to establish Jessica as the family's new voice of contemporary wisdom, while positioning me as someone whose perspectives, while well-intentioned, were no longer relevant or helpful for addressing modern problems and opportunities. "I think Eleanor has a lot of wisdom from her experiences," Jessica would say during family discussions, "but the situation that Sarah is dealing with at work is probably quite different from what people faced in previous generations." Maybe we should focus on current approaches that are more relevant to today's workplace dynamics. The phrase current approaches was particularly significant because it suggested that Jessica considered herself more knowledgeable about contemporary challenges than someone who had been observing and helping family members navigate similar problems for decades. She was implying that my accumulated experience and proven track record of successful guidance were less valuable than her theoretical knowledge of modern approaches to problem solving. Jessica's systematic devaluation of my experience and wisdom was not only disrespectful, but also practically counterproductive for the family's ability to address challenges effectively. She was eliminating access to resources and insights that had been proven successful over decades of implementation, and she was replacing them with untested theories about what relationships should look like according to contemporary standards. The most damaging aspect of Jessica's approach was her failure to understand that family problems and challenges haven't fundamentally changed over the decades, and that the principles of effective communication, mutual support, and collaborative problem-solving that I had been teaching and modeling were as relevant today as they had been in previous generations. Jessica's belief that modern approaches were automatically superior to traditional methods revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and relationship dynamics. She was assuming that contemporary theories about family relationships were more effective than time-tested practices that had been proven successful through actual implementation and results. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Jessica's campaign to modernize our family dynamics was her complete failure to recognize that the information, insights, and emotional connection she was trying to eliminate were actually the foundation of her own security and acceptance within the family. She was systematically alienating the person who had been most responsible for helping family members understand and appreciate her contributions to the family. Over the 5 years of her marriage to Robert, Jessica had gradually transformed from someone who appreciated and respected my role in the family into someone who viewed me as an obstacle to her vision of what a modern, sophisticated family should look like. The transformation had been so gradual and subtle that she probably didn't realize how dramatically her attitude and behavior toward me had changed. The change was most evident in Jessica's body language and tone of voice during our interactions. During their courtship and early marriage, she had spoken to me with genuine warmth and interest, asking questions and listening to my responses with the kind of focused attention that suggested she valued my perspectives and insights. Her posture had been open and engaged, and her facial expressions had conveyed respect and appreciation. But as Jessica's campaign to modernize the family had progressed, her interactions with me had become increasingly formal and distant. She would listen politely to my comments but would rarely ask follow-up questions or express genuine interest in learning more about my experiences or perspectives. Her body language had become more closed and defensive, and her facial expressions had begun to convey tolerance rather than appreciation. The transformation was particularly evident during family gatherings, where Jessica would position herself physically to minimize her interaction with me while maximizing her engagement with family members she considered more relevant to her social and family goals. She would sit at the opposite end of the table during dinners, join conversations that didn't include me, and excuse herself when discussions turned to topics where my experience and wisdom might be particularly valuable. Jessica's avoidance of meaningful interaction with me was not only personally hurtful, but also strategically foolish, because it eliminated her access to the information and insights that could have helped her understand and navigate family dynamics more effectively. She was choosing to remain ignorant about family history, relationships, and underlying tensions that could have been valuable for her own success and security within the family. The most revealing aspect of Jessica's changed attitude toward me was her response to family members who continued to seek my advice and support, despite her obvious disapproval. She would watch these interactions with barely concealed irritation, making subtle comments and gestures that indicated she found such behavior inappropriate and potentially embarrassing. "I don't understand why everyone always runs to Eleanor with their problems," Jessica had complained to Robert during one of their private conversations. "Don't you think it's time for people to learn to handle their own challenges without always needing to involve the older generation? It seems like this family has trouble moving forward because everyone is so dependent on outdated approaches to problem solving." The phrase "outdated approaches" was particularly insulting because it dismissed decades of successful guidance and support as irrelevant to contemporary challenges. Jessica was suggesting that the very qualities that had made me valuable to family members for years were actually obstacles to their development and the family's progress toward healthier relationship patterns. Jessica's criticism of family members who continued to value my guidance was not only disrespectful to me, but also condescending to other family members who were capable of making their own decisions about whose advice and support they found valuable. She was essentially arguing that she understood everyone's needs better than they did, and that her contemporary perspective on family relationships was superior to their own preferences and experiences. The arrogance of Jessica's position was staggering, but it was also revealing of her fundamental approach to family relationships. She viewed herself as someone who understood modern family dynamics better than people who had been part of the Mitchell family for decades, and she believed that her theoretical knowledge about contemporary approaches was more valuable than practical experience and proven results. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Jessica's attitude was her apparent belief that she could gradually marginalize me and reduce my influence in family decisions without facing any consequences for her behavior. She seemed to assume that my gentle, traditional approach to family relationships meant that I would passively accept whatever changes she imposed, regardless of how those changes affected me personally or the family as a whole. Jessica's assumption that I would quietly accept marginalization revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of my character and her complete ignorance about the resources and capabilities that I possessed. She was treating me like a powerless elderly woman who would be grateful for whatever scraps of respect and inclusion she chose to provide, when in reality, she was systematically alienating someone who possessed comprehensive knowledge of every family member's vulnerabilities and secrets. The irony was that Jessica's campaign to reduce my influence and modernize our family dynamics was actually creating the perfect conditions for her own destruction. She was transforming someone who had been committed to protecting family harmony and maintaining everyone's privacy into someone who had every reason to feel hurt, unappreciated, and potentially vengeful. Jessica's treatment of me over 5 years of marriage had evolved from respectful appreciation to subtle dismissal to outright condescension, and she had made these changes without understanding that she was creating exactly the kind of dangerous situation that her image-obsessed approach to relationships was supposed to prevent. She was alienating the person who knew everyone's secrets while simultaneously demonstrating the kind of character flaws that would make her a particularly vulnerable target if those secrets were ever exposed. The stage was set for Jessica to discover that her systematic campaign to silence and marginalize me had created a situation where the person she had been dismissing as an irrelevant relic was actually the most dangerous person in the room. She was about to learn that treating someone with condescension and disrespect can have consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings, especially when that person possesses the kind of comprehensive information that could destroy the carefully constructed facade that had become more important to her than genuine relationships. The woman she thought she could silence and control was actually the keeper of every piece of information that could expose the gap between her public image and her private character. And Jessica's years of condescending treatment had just given me permission to stop protecting someone who had never appreciated or respected the discretion and loyalty that had kept her secrets safe. Justice was coming to Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell, and it was going to be delivered by someone who had spent 5 years observing her true character, while quietly protecting her from the consequences of her own behavior. The protection was about to end, and Jessica was going to discover exactly what happened when someone fundamentally underestimated the power of a woman who had been watching, listening, and remembering everything. To understand how Jessica's command for me to keep quiet would trigger the most catastrophic family scandal in Mitchell history, you need to understand how her behavior had escalated over the 18 months leading up to that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. Because what happened that night wasn't an isolated moment of poor judgment, but the culmination of increasingly desperate and destructive behavior from someone whose attempts to control our family had been failing spectacularly. The escalation of Jessica's problematic behavior began in earnest during the summer of 2022, when she realized that her 5-year campaign to modernize the Mitchell family and establish herself as our new matriarch had not only failed to achieve her goals, but had actually made her more isolated and less influential than when she had first married Robert. Despite years of subtle manipulation and strategic relationship management, Jessica found herself in the humiliating position of being politely tolerated rather than genuinely respected by the very family she had been trying to impress and control. The first indication of Jessica's growing desperation came during our July 2022 family barbecue, when she made what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about the family's future direction and her role in shaping it. The occasion was my youngest grandson Timothy's high school graduation celebration, and Jessica had volunteered to coordinate the event as a demonstration of her organizational skills and her commitment to family traditions. But Jessica's approach to coordinating Timothy's graduation party revealed immediately that she had learned nothing from 5 years of observing how successful family events were actually planned and executed. Instead of consulting with family members about their preferences and traditions, she had unilaterally decided that our usual approach to family celebrations was outdated and needed to be updated to reflect more contemporary approaches to family gatherings. "I think it's time for this family to move beyond the same old potluck approach to celebrations," Jessica announced during the planning phone call with family members. "I've researched some really exciting catering options that would allow us to have a more sophisticated celebration without requiring everyone to spend hours in the kitchen preparing traditional dishes." Quote, the phrase, "move beyond the same old potluck approach," was particularly revealing because it demonstrated Jessica's fundamental misunderstanding of why our family celebrations had been successful for decades. She interpreted our tradition of collaborative meal preparation as a burden that needed to be eliminated, rather than understanding it as an expression of love and care that brought family members together in meaningful ways. The family's response to Jessica's catering proposal was polite, but firm rejection, with multiple family members explaining that the collaborative preparation of family meals was an important part of our celebration traditions and that eliminating it would fundamentally change the character of our gatherings. My daughter Sarah expressed the family's position most clearly during the planning conversation. "Jessica, we really appreciate you wanting to help with the party planning," Sarah said diplomatically, "but making food together is one of the things that makes our family celebrations special. It's not about convenience or efficiency. It's about spending time together and contributing something personal to the celebration." Sarah's explanation was gentle but definitive, reflecting the family's unanimous preference for maintaining traditions that had proven successful and meaningful over many years. But Jessica's response to this feedback revealed her growing frustration with the family's resistance to her modernization efforts, and her increasing willingness to express criticism openly, rather than through subtle manipulation. "I understand that you're attached to traditional approaches," Jessica replied in a tone that barely concealed her irritation. "But I think it's important to consider whether those approaches are actually serving everyone's needs or just making things more complicated than they need to be. Sometimes families get stuck in patterns that worked in the past but aren't efficient or enjoyable for people today." The phrase "stuck in patterns" was particularly insulting because it suggested that our family traditions were the result of inertia rather than conscious choice, and that our preference for collaborative celebration was evidence of our inability to adapt to modern approaches rather than recognition of what actually worked for our family's happiness and connection. Jessica's criticism of our family traditions was not only disrespectful but also strategically counterproductive for her own goals. She was essentially arguing that the very qualities that had made our family close and supportive were obstacles to our development and happiness, and she was positioning herself as someone who understood our needs better than we did. The graduation party itself became a microcosm of Jessica's broader relationship problems within the family, as her attempts to impose her vision of a, quote, sophisticated celebration created tension and awkwardness, rather than the impressive family unity she had hoped to demonstrate. Jessica had insisted on creating a formal program for the event, complete with scheduled speeches, organized activities, and designated photography moments that would create the kind of polished celebration she believed appropriate for a family gathering. But the family's response to Jessica's structured approach was discomfort and resistance, as family members found themselves feeling like guests at their own family celebration rather than participants in a collaborative expression of love and support for Timothy's achievement. The artificial formality that Jessica had imposed eliminated the spontaneous conversations, informal interactions, and genuine emotional connections that had made our family celebrations meaningful and enjoyable. The most revealing moment came when Jessica attempted to direct the gift-giving portion of the celebration, creating a formal presentation ceremony that would allow her to coordinate the timing and maximize the photographic opportunities. But her attempts to stage manage Timothy's responses to gifts and organize family members' expressions of congratulations created exactly the kind of performative atmosphere that our family had always avoided. "Let's make sure everyone gathers around while Timothy opens his gifts," Jessica announced, positioning herself as the event coordinator and director. "I want to make sure we get good photos of everyone's reactions, and I think it would be nice if each person could say something about why they chose their particular gift." The family's response to Jessica's direction was polite compliance mixed with obvious discomfort, as family members found themselves participating in a scripted performance rather than the genuine, spontaneous celebration they had expected. The artificial structure that Jessica had imposed eliminated the natural flow of conversation and connection that had made our family gatherings special and meaningful. Timothy's own response to Jessica's orchestrated gift ceremony was particularly telling, as he clearly felt uncomfortable being the center of such organized attention and would have preferred the more casual, intimate approach that had characterized previous family celebrations. His obvious discomfort with Jessica's formal presentation created exactly the kind of awkward situation that our family traditions had been designed to avoid. But Jessica's interpretation of the family's response to her structured approach was that we were resistant to change and improvement, rather than that her approach was inappropriate for our family's culture and values. She seemed to believe that our discomfort with her formal presentation was evidence of our inability to appreciate sophisticated event planning, rather than recognition that her approach was incompatible with our family's authentic preferences. The failure of Jessica's graduation party experiment marked the beginning of her more aggressive and obvious attempts to impose her vision of family relationships on people who had repeatedly indicated their preference for maintaining successful traditions. Instead of learning from the feedback she had received, Jessica seemed to interpret the family's resistance as a challenge that required more determined effort and clearer assertion of her authority. The escalation of Jessica's controlling behavior became particularly evident during our August 2022 family reunion, when she made what appeared to be a calculated decision to position herself as the family's official spokesperson and representative to the extended family members who would be attending the gathering. Jessica had volunteered to create a family newsletter that would be distributed to reunion attendees, and she had presented this project as a service to the family that would help everyone stay connected and informed about family news and developments. But Jessica's approach to creating the family newsletter revealed immediately that she viewed the project as an opportunity to establish herself as the family's official historian and communications coordinator, rather than simply providing a helpful service. She had unilaterally decided what information should be included, how family members should be presented, and what image the family should project to extended relatives. The content of Jessica's newsletter was particularly revealing of her priorities and her misunderstanding of family dynamics. Instead of focusing on genuine family news and personal updates that would be meaningful to extended family members, she had created a polished publication that emphasized professional achievements, social activities, and lifestyle choices that would project success and sophistication. Jessica's newsletter included extensive coverage of family members' career advancement, educational achievements, and travel experiences, but very little information about the personal struggles, health challenges, or emotional milestones that had actually been central to our family's experiences during the previous year. She had essentially created a marketing document that presented the Mitchell family as more successful and sophisticated than we actually were, rather than sharing authentic information that would help extended family members understand and connect with our genuine experiences. The most problematic aspect of Jessica's newsletter was her decision to include information about family members' personal lives without consulting with them about their privacy preferences or their comfort with sharing particular details with extended family. She had made unilateral decisions about what information was appropriate to share and how family members should be presented, treating our private family dynamics as material for her public relations project. My granddaughter Emma's response to Jessica's newsletter was particularly revealing of how Jessica's approach to family communication was creating discomfort and resentment, rather than the improved family connection she claimed to be promoting. Emma had been dealing with anxiety and academic pressure during her senior year of high school, and Jessica had included information about her college applications and academic achievements without understanding the stress and complexity of Emma's actual experience. "I don't understand why Aunt Jessica felt like she needed to write about my college plans," Emma confided to me during a private conversation. "She made it sound like everything was perfect and easy, but she doesn't know anything about how stressed I've been or how hard it's been to deal with all the pressure. It's embarrassing to have extended family think I'm doing great when I'm actually struggling." Emma's concern about Jessica's misrepresentation of her situation was just one example of how Jessica's attempts to improve family communication were actually creating distance and misunderstanding, rather than the enhanced connection she claimed to be promoting. By focusing on surface-level achievements and projecting artificial success, Jessica was eliminating the authentic sharing and genuine support that had made our family gatherings meaningful and valuable. The family's response to Jessica's newsletter was polite appreciation mixed with private concern about her approach to family privacy and her apparent misunderstanding of what information was appropriate to share with extended family members. Several family members expressed discomfort with Jessica's decision to include personal information without consultation, and others questioned whether her polished presentation accurately reflected our family's actual experiences and values. But Jessica's interpretation of the family's lukewarm response to her newsletter was that we were ungrateful for her efforts, rather than concerned about her approach to family communication. She seemed to believe that our discomfort with her public relations approach was evidence of our inability to appreciate professional quality family communication, rather than recognition that her approach was inappropriate for our family's culture and values. The most revealing aspect of Jessica's response to the family's feedback was her apparent belief that her contemporary approach to family communication was automatically superior to our traditional methods of staying connected and informed about each other's lives. She seemed to assume that our preference for informal, personal communication was evidence of our inability to adapt to modern approaches rather than recognition of what actually worked for our family's needs and preferences. Jessica's continued misunderstanding of family dynamics and her growing frustration with our resistance to her modernization efforts led to increasingly obvious attempts to assert her authority and demonstrate her superior understanding of contemporary family relationships. The pattern that emerged over the fall of 2022 was one of escalating control attempts, followed by family resistance, followed by Jessica's increased determination to impose her vision more forcefully. The most dramatic example of Jessica's escalating behavior came during our October 2022 family game night, when she made what appeared to be a calculated decision to challenge my role as the family's informal coordinator and emotional anchor. The incident occurred when my son Michael sought my advice about a difficult situation with his teenage daughter, and Jessica intervened to redirect the conversation in ways that explicitly questioned my qualifications and approach. "I think it's wonderful that everyone values Eleanor's perspective," Jessica announced during Michael's consultation with me, "but I wonder if we might benefit from more current approaches to parenting teenagers. The challenges that kids face today are quite different from what previous generations experienced, and there are some really effective contemporary strategies that might be more relevant to this situation." The phrase "more current approaches" was particularly insulting because it suggested that my decades of experience helping family members navigate parenting challenges were irrelevant to contemporary problems, and that Jessica's theoretical knowledge of modern parenting strategies was more valuable than practical experience and proven results. Michael's response to Jessica's intervention was immediate and definitive, reflecting his understanding that Jessica's criticism of my advice was both inappropriate and inaccurate. "Jessica, I appreciate your concern, but Mom has helped me and my siblings navigate parenting challenges for years, and her advice has always been valuable and effective. I'm not interested in theoretical approaches when I can get guidance from someone who actually knows our family and understands what works for us." Michael's public rejection of Jessica's intervention was significant because it represented the first time that a family member had directly challenged her attempts to assert authority and establish herself as the family's expert on contemporary relationships. His response made it clear that the family valued practical experience and proven results over theoretical knowledge and modern approaches. But Jessica's reaction to Michael's rejection was not acknowledgement of her inappropriate behavior, but rather increased determination to establish her authority and demonstrate her superior understanding of family dynamics. She began making more frequent and obvious attempts to redirect conversations, challenge my advice, and position herself as the family's voice of contemporary wisdom. The escalation of Jessica's controlling behavior was particularly evident during our November 2022 family birthday celebration for my daughter Sarah, when Jessica made what appeared to be a calculated decision to publicly question my judgment and competence in front of extended family members who rarely witnessed our family dynamics. The incident occurred when Sarah's mother-in-law asked me about effective approaches to handling conflict between adult siblings, and Jessica intervened to provide what she characterized as more current and professional guidance. "I think Eleanor's perspective is sweet and well-intentioned," Jessica announced to the gathered family members, "but sibling conflict is actually quite complex and really benefits from professional therapeutic approaches rather than family advice. There are some excellent resources and strategies that are much more effective than traditional family mediation." The phrase "sweet and well-intentioned" was particularly condescending because it suggested that my successful approach to family conflict resolution was the result of good intentions rather than skill and experience, and that Jessica's theoretical knowledge of professional therapeutic approaches was more valuable than practical results and proven effectiveness. Sarah's response to Jessica's public criticism of my advice was immediate and forceful, reflecting her understanding that Jessica's behavior was not only inappropriate, but also potentially damaging to family relationships and my reputation within the extended family. "Jessica, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing by criticizing my mother's advice, but you're way out of line. Mom has been helping our family resolve conflicts successfully for decades, and your theoretical knowledge doesn't compare to her practical experience and proven results." Sarah's public defense of me was significant because it represented the first time that Jessica's inappropriate behavior had been directly challenged in front of extended family members, and it made clear that the family would not tolerate continued disrespect and undermining of my role and contributions to family harmony. But Jessica's reaction to Sarah's defense was not embarrassment or acknowledgement of her inappropriate behavior, but rather increased anger and determination to establish her authority and demonstrate her superior understanding of family dynamics. She began making more aggressive attempts to challenge my influence and position herself as the family's expert on contemporary relationships. The pattern that emerged during the final months of 2022 was one of Jessica's increasing desperation and increasingly obvious attempts to assert control over family dynamics that she fundamentally misunderstood. Her behavior became more confrontational, her criticism more direct, and her attempts to establish authority more aggressive and inappropriate. The most troubling aspect of Jessica's escalating behavior was her apparent belief that she could challenge my role and influence in the family without understanding the consequences of alienating someone who possessed comprehensive knowledge of everyone's secrets and vulnerabilities. She seemed to assume that my gentle, traditional approach to family relationships meant that I would passively accept whatever treatment she chose to provide, regardless of how disrespectful or inappropriate her behavior became. Jessica's assumption that I would quietly tolerate her increasing disrespect and challenges to my authority revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of my character and her complete ignorance about the resources and capabilities that I possessed. She was treating me like a powerless elderly woman who would be grateful for whatever scraps of respect she chose to provide, when in reality, she was systematically alienating someone who could destroy her carefully constructed image and social standing with a single conversation. The irony was that Jessica's escalating attempts to assert control and establish authority were actually creating the perfect conditions for her own destruction. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of character flaws and behavioral problems that would make her a particularly vulnerable target if the information I possessed about family members' private lives were ever used strategically. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Jessica's escalating behavior was her apparent belief that she could continue to challenge and disrespect me without facing any consequences for her actions. She seemed to assume that my commitment to family harmony and my reputation for discretion meant that I would never use the information I possessed to defend myself or respond to her inappropriate behavior. Jessica's assumption that I would remain passive and protective regardless of how she treated me revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and her complete ignorance about the limits of even the most patient and loyal person's tolerance for disrespect and abuse. She was creating a situation where someone who had spent years protecting family secrets and maintaining family harmony had every reason to reconsider those priorities and commitments. The stage was set for Jessica to discover that her escalating campaign of disrespect and control attempts had created exactly the kind of dangerous situation that her image-obsessed approach to relationships was supposed to prevent. She had transformed someone who had been committed to protecting family harmony into someone who had been pushed beyond the limits of patience and loyalty. The woman she thought she could challenge and control with impunity was actually the keeper of every piece of information that could destroy the carefully constructed facade that had become more important to her than genuine relationships. And Jessica's escalating disrespect had just convinced me that protecting her reputation was no longer worth the personal cost of tolerating her abuse. Justice was coming to Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell, and it was going to be delivered by someone who had spent months observing her increasing desperation and deteriorating behavior, while quietly maintaining the secrets that had kept her safe from the consequences of her own character flaws. The protection was about to end, and Jessica was going to discover exactly what happened when someone pushed the wrong person too far. To understand why Jessica's command for me to keep quiet would result in the complete destruction of everything she had worked to build over 5 years of marriage, you need to understand exactly who Eleanor Mitchell really was beneath the gentle grandmother facade. Because the woman Jessica had been systematically dismissing and disrespecting wasn't just a harmless elderly church secretary, but someone who possessed a comprehensive understanding of human nature, strategic thinking abilities, and access to information that could destroy lives with surgical precision. My journey into becoming the Mitchell family's unofficial intelligence center began not by design, but through a combination of natural empathy, developed listening skills, and the kind of strategic thinking that most people never associate with elderly women who bake cookies and attend church functions. But what had started as genuine concern for my family's welfare had evolved over 15 years into something far more sophisticated and potentially dangerous than anyone, including Jessica, had ever imagined. The foundation of my hidden power was built on a simple but profound principle that I had learned during my early years as a church secretary. People will tell you absolutely anything if they believe you're safe, trustworthy, and incapable of using their information against them. The combination of my gentle demeanor, my obvious love for family members, and my apparent powerlessness had created the perfect conditions for people to share their deepest secrets, most embarrassing failures, and most damaging vulnerabilities without ever considering the potential consequences. Over the past 15 years, I had accumulated what amounted to a comprehensive psychological profile of every family member, their spouses, their children, and even their close friends and professional associates. I knew their financial situations, their marital problems, their career struggles, their health issues, their secret ambitions, their hidden fears, and their most carefully guarded shame and guilt. But more importantly, I understood how all of these individual pieces of information connected to create a complete picture of family dynamics, power relationships, and strategic vulnerabilities that could be exploited if necessary. My role as the family's emotional anchor and informal counselor had provided me with access to information that no private investigator, therapist, or law enforcement officer could have obtained through conventional means. People had confided in me during moments of crisis, desperation, and emotional vulnerability, when their normal defenses were down and their need for support overcame their usual caution about sharing sensitive information. The scope of secrets I had accumulated was staggering in both its breadth and its potential for damage. I knew about affairs that would destroy marriages, financial irregularities that could end careers, personal habits that would cause social embarrassment, family conflicts that would shatter relationships, and individual vulnerabilities that could be exploited to manipulate behavior and control outcomes. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of my accumulated knowledge was my understanding of the complex web of relationships, dependencies, and mutual vulnerabilities that connected every family member to every other family member. I could see how revealing one person's secret would create ripple effects that would expose other people's vulnerabilities, and how strategic use of information could create cascading consequences that would be impossible to contain or control. My son Robert, for example, had confided in me about his struggles with gambling addiction during the early years of his marriage to Jessica. He had been spending their savings on online poker games and sports betting, creating financial stress that was affecting their relationship and threatening their future security. Robert's gambling problem had been his most closely guarded secret, something that he had never shared with Jessica or anyone else in the family. But I also knew that Robert's gambling addiction was connected to his deeper insecurities about his professional achievement, and his fear that he wasn't successful enough to provide Jessica with the lifestyle she expected. His gambling was a way of trying to create the kind of sudden financial success that would solve their money problems and prove his worth as a provider. But it was actually making their financial situation worse and creating exactly the kind of instability that would threaten their marriage. The strategic implications of Robert's gambling secret were enormous, because it represented the kind of information that could be used to explain and justify Jessica's controlling behavior, while simultaneously destroying her image as the victim of an outdated family's resistance to modernization. If Robert's gambling addiction were revealed, it would become clear that Jessica's attempts to control family finances and social activities were actually responses to her husband's irresponsible behavior, rather than evidence of her sophisticated approach to family management. My daughter Sarah had shared her own devastating secret during a tearful conversation following her daughter's arrest for drug possession. Sarah had been stealing money from her employer to pay for her daughter's legal expenses and rehabilitation programs, creating a situation where she was vulnerable to criminal charges and professional destruction if her theft were discovered. Sarah's embezzlement had been motivated by her desperate desire to protect her daughter's future and her fear that asking family members for financial help would reveal the extent of her parenting failures. But Sarah's financial crimes were connected to her deeper feelings of inadequacy as a mother and her guilt about her daughter's problems. She had been trying to solve her family's crisis through illegal means because she was too proud to admit that she needed help, and too ashamed to acknowledge that her daughter's addiction problems reflected poorly on her parenting skills. The strategic implications of Sarah's embezzlement secret were particularly dangerous because it represented the kind of information that could be used to destroy her professionally and personally, while also creating legal consequences that would affect her entire family. If Sarah's theft were revealed, it would not only end her career and potentially result in criminal charges, but it would also create financial and social consequences that would affect her husband's business and her other children's futures. My younger son Michael had confided in me about his affair with his business partner's wife, a relationship that had been ongoing for over 2 years and was threatening to destroy both his marriage and his professional partnership. Michael's affair was motivated by his feeling that his wife had become emotionally distant, and his belief that his business partner's wife understood and appreciated him in ways that his own wife no longer did. But Michael's affair was connected to his deeper problems with emotional maturity and his pattern of avoiding difficult conversations and relationship challenges by seeking validation from other women. His affair wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a broader pattern of behavior that revealed fundamental character flaws and relationship problems that would continue to create problems throughout his life. The strategic implications of Michael's affair were particularly complex because revealing it would destroy multiple relationships simultaneously and create professional consequences that would affect his business, his employees, and his family's financial security. If Michael's affair were exposed, it would not only end his marriage and business partnership, but would also create legal and financial complications that would affect everyone who depended on his professional success. But the secrets I possessed weren't limited to major life crises and dramatic personal failures. I also knew about countless smaller secrets, embarrassing incidents, and personal vulnerabilities that could be used to manipulate behavior, control outcomes, and create social consequences that would be difficult to overcome. I knew that Jessica's sister had been having an affair with her children's soccer coach, creating a situation where she was vulnerable to blackmail and social embarrassment if her behavior were revealed to her husband or the other parents in their community. I knew that Robert's business partner had been inflating his company's earnings to qualify for loans, creating legal vulnerabilities that could result in fraud charges and business failure. I knew that my grandson had been selling drugs to his classmates to pay for his car insurance and entertainment expenses, creating legal risks that could affect his college plans and future career opportunities. I knew that my granddaughter had been struggling with an eating disorder that she had hidden from her parents, creating health risks that could have serious long-term consequences if not addressed properly. But perhaps most importantly, I knew that Jessica herself had been hiding her own devastating secret from Robert and the rest of the family. During one of our early conversations, when she had still been trying to establish herself as someone who valued family relationships and traditional approaches to marriage, Jessica had revealed that she had been married before and had divorced her first husband after discovering his affair with her best friend. The previous marriage was something that Jessica had carefully concealed from Robert and the family, creating a completely false narrative about her background and relationship history. She had presented herself as someone who had been waiting for the right person to commit to marriage, when in reality she had already experienced marriage failure and had been divorced for over 2 years before meeting Robert. Jessica's concealment of her previous marriage was connected to her deeper fears about her ability to maintain successful relationships and her desperate need to project an image of perfection and emotional stability. She had hidden her divorce because she was afraid that Robert and his family would view her as damaged goods, or would question her commitment to making their marriage successful. But Jessica's secret was particularly vulnerable because it represented the kind of deception that would fundamentally change how Robert and the family viewed her character and trustworthiness. If Jessica's previous marriage were revealed, it would not only expose her willingness to lie about important personal history, but would also raise questions about what other aspects of her background and personality she had misrepresented. The strategic implications of Jessica's hidden divorce were enormous because it represented the kind of information that could be used to destroy her credibility and moral authority within the family, while simultaneously explaining her controlling behavior and need for perfection as evidence of her insecurity and fear of relationship failure, rather than her sophisticated approach to family management. But beyond the individual secrets that I possessed about each family member, I had also developed a comprehensive understanding of the complex web of relationships, dependencies, and mutual vulnerabilities that connected everyone to everyone else. I could see how revealing one person's secret would create ripple effects that would expose other people's problems, and how strategic use of information could create cascading consequences that would be impossible to contain or control. The most dangerous aspect of my accumulated knowledge was my understanding of how family dynamics actually worked beneath the surface of polite conversation and social performance. I knew which relationships were genuinely strong and which were held together by convenience and social pressure. I knew which family members were genuinely supportive of each other and which were secretly competitive or resentful. I knew which marriages were stable and which were vulnerable to outside pressure or internal conflict. This understanding of family dynamics meant that I could predict how people would respond to different types of information and pressure, and I could anticipate the likely consequences of revealing particular secrets or creating specific types of conflict. I had essentially developed a strategic map of family relationships that could be used to manipulate outcomes and control behavior in ways that would be invisible to people who didn't understand the underlying dynamics. But perhaps the most important aspect of my hidden power was my understanding of human psychology and my ability to read people's motivations, insecurities, and behavioral patterns with remarkable accuracy. 15 years of serving as the family's informal counselor had taught me how to identify the emotional triggers that would cause people to act irrationally, the psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited to control behavior, and the strategic approaches that would be most effective for achieving specific outcomes. I had learned to recognize the signs that indicated when someone was hiding something important, when they were feeling guilty or ashamed about their behavior, when they were vulnerable to manipulation or pressure, and when they were likely to make mistakes that would create opportunities for intervention or control. This psychological insight gave me the ability to predict and influence behavior in ways that would be impossible for someone who didn't understand the underlying emotional dynamics. My ability to read people's psychological states and predict their behavior had been particularly valuable in understanding Jessica's character and anticipating her likely responses to different types of pressure and information. I had been observing her behavioral patterns for 5 years, and I had developed a comprehensive understanding of her motivations, insecurities, and psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited if necessary. I knew that Jessica's greatest fear was being exposed as someone who was not as sophisticated and successful as she pretended to be. Her entire identity was built on maintaining an image of perfection and contemporary wisdom, and any information that contradicted this image would be psychologically devastating for her. I also knew that Jessica's controlling behavior was motivated by her deep insecurities about her ability to maintain successful relationships, and her fear that people would discover her personal failures and reject her if they knew the truth about her background and character. But perhaps most importantly, I knew that Jessica's approach to family relationships was fundamentally transactional and strategic, rather than genuinely caring and supportive. She viewed family members as resources to be managed and controlled, rather than as people to be loved and supported, and her behavior was motivated by her desire to create a family image that would enhance her social standing rather than by genuine concern for everyone's welfare and happiness. This understanding of Jessica's character and motivations meant that I could predict how she would respond to different types of pressure and information, and I could anticipate the most effective approaches for exposing her hypocrisy and destroying her credibility within the family. I knew exactly which revelations would be most damaging to her image, and which approaches would be most effective for ensuring that she faced appropriate consequences for her behavior. The combination of comprehensive information about everyone's secrets, deep understanding of family dynamics, and sophisticated psychological insight had created a level of strategic capability that was far beyond what anyone in the family had ever imagined. I possessed the knowledge and understanding necessary to manipulate family relationships, control outcomes, and create consequences that would be impossible to escape or overcome. But the most dangerous aspect of my hidden power was my moral authority and reputation for integrity within the family and community. 15 years of serving as the family's emotional anchor and informal counselor had established me as someone who was completely trustworthy, absolutely reliable, and genuinely committed to everyone's welfare. This reputation meant that when I spoke about family issues or shared information about family members' behavior, people would automatically assume that my motivations were pure and my information was accurate. My moral authority meant that I could destroy someone's reputation simply by expressing concerns about their behavior or character, and I could create social consequences that would be impossible to overcome simply by sharing information that contradicted their public image. The combination of comprehensive information and moral authority created a level of power that was far more dangerous than conventional forms of influence or control. Jessica's systematic campaign to dismiss and marginalize me had been not just personally hurtful, but strategically catastrophic for her own security and future within the family. She had been alienating the one person who possessed the knowledge and capabilities necessary to destroy everything she had worked to build. And she had been doing so without understanding the consequences of her behavior, or the dangers of pushing someone with my resources and understanding beyond the limits of patience and loyalty. The woman Jessica thought she could silence and control was actually the most dangerous person in the room, and her years of disrespectful treatment had convinced me that protecting her reputation and maintaining family harmony were no longer worth the personal cost of tolerating her abuse. The protection was about to end, and Jessica was going to discover exactly what happened when someone fundamentally underestimated the power of a woman who had been watching, listening, and remembering everything for 15 years. The stage was set for Jessica to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person at the dinner table is the one who looks like they couldn't possibly hurt you, and that treating someone with comprehensive knowledge of everyone's secrets with condescension and disrespect was the kind of strategic mistake that could destroy a carefully constructed life in a single evening. Justice was coming to Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell, and it was going to be delivered by someone who understood exactly how to use the truth to create consequences that would be both devastating and impossible to escape. The evening of November 23, 2023, started like any other Mitchell family Thanksgiving dinner, with no indication that by midnight, Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell would be completely destroyed. Her marriage would be over, and every carefully constructed lie she had built her life upon would be exposed in the most devastating family scandal in 3 generations of Mitchell history. Our traditional Thanksgiving gathering was being held at Robert and Jessica's house, a decision that Jessica had insisted upon as part of her ongoing campaign to establish herself as the family's new matriarch and demonstrate her sophisticated approach to entertaining. She had spent weeks planning what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about the family's evolution under her leadership, complete with professional catering, elegant table settings, and a formal program that would showcase her organizational skills and contemporary vision for family celebrations. The guest list for Jessica's Thanksgiving extravaganza included not just immediate family members but also several of Robert's business associates, Jessica's sister and her husband, and even some neighbors who Jessica had cultivated as part of her social advancement strategy. The expanded guest list was clearly designed to create an audience for Jessica's performance as the sophisticated hostess who had successfully modernized the Mitchell family's approach to traditional celebrations. I arrived at 6:30 in the evening wearing my simple navy blue dress and carrying a homemade sweet potato casserole in one of my glass baking dishes, the same humble approach to family gatherings that had characterized my participation in Mitchell celebrations for decades. But what the other guests couldn't see was that I had spent the previous week making a careful decision about how to respond to Jessica's escalating disrespect and her systematic campaign to marginalize my role in the family. The tipping point had come 3 days earlier, when Jessica had called me to discuss the Thanksgiving arrangements and had made what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about my future role in family gatherings. Her tone had been condescending and dismissive, treating me like an elderly relative who needed to be managed, rather than a family member who deserved respect and consideration. "Eleanor, I want to talk to you about Thanksgiving dinner," Jessica had said in the carefully controlled voice she used when she was trying to sound diplomatic while actually being controlling. "I think it would be best if you understood that we're trying to create a more sophisticated atmosphere this year, and I need you to be mindful of not dominating conversations or overwhelming our guests with too much family history and personal stories." The phrase, "not dominating conversations," was particularly insulting because it suggested that my natural way of interacting with family members was inappropriate and burdensome, rather than the caring, supportive approach that had been central to our family culture for decades. Jessica was essentially telling me to remain silent and invisible during a family gathering in my own son's home. But Jessica's most revealing comment had come at the end of our conversation, when she had made what she clearly intended to be a definitive statement about the family's future direction and my place within it. "I hope you understand that families today have different expectations about boundaries and appropriate involvement than previous generations did. It's time for this family to move forward with more contemporary approaches to relationships, and that means everyone needs to understand their appropriate role." The phrase, "understand their appropriate role," was the moment when I realized that Jessica's campaign to marginalize me had reached the point where she was explicitly demanding that I accept a subordinate position within my own family. She was telling me that my decades of service, wisdom, and emotional support were no longer valued or wanted, and that I needed to accept whatever limited role she was willing to assign to me. That conversation had been the final straw that convinced me that protecting Jessica's reputation and maintaining family harmony were no longer worth the personal cost of tolerating her abuse. I had spent 15 years keeping everyone's secrets and maintaining family stability. But Jessica's demand that I understand my appropriate role had released me from any obligation to continue protecting someone who had systematically demonstrated that she had no respect for me or appreciation for my contributions to the family. The decision to expose Jessica's secrets and destroy her carefully constructed facade hadn't been made lightly or impulsively. I had spent 3 days considering the consequences of my actions and planning the most effective approach for ensuring that Jessica faced appropriate consequences for her behavior, while also protecting the family members who would be affected by the revelations. I had decided that the most effective approach would be to wait for Jessica to publicly demonstrate her disrespect and controlling behavior in front of the expanded group of guests she had invited to witness her performance as the family's sophisticated new leader. When she inevitably revealed her true character through her treatment of me, I would respond with strategic revelations that would expose her hypocrisy and destroy her credibility in the most public and devastating way possible. The early evening reception proceeded exactly as Jessica had planned, with guests arriving to find an elegantly appointed dining room, professional catering, and Jessica positioned as the gracious hostess who had successfully created a sophisticated family celebration. She moved through the crowd with obvious satisfaction, making sure that everyone appreciated the elegant atmosphere she had created and the contemporary approach she had brought to traditional family gatherings. But I could see immediately that Jessica's formal approach to the evening was creating the same kind of artificial atmosphere that had characterized her previous attempts to impose sophisticated structure on family events. Instead of the warm, intimate conversations that had always characterized Mitchell family gatherings, the reception featured the kind of polite small talk and surface-level interactions that suggested people were performing their roles rather than genuinely connecting with each other. The most telling moment came when Jessica's business associate asked about family traditions and history, creating exactly the kind of opportunity for storytelling and family connection that had always been central to our celebrations. But when I began to share some of the family stories that had been passed down through generations, Jessica quickly intervened to redirect the conversation toward more contemporary topics. "That's a lovely story, Eleanor," Jessica said in the patronizing tone she used when she wanted to dismiss my contributions while appearing polite. "But I think our guests might be more interested in hearing about the family's current activities and future plans, rather than dwelling on old history." Quote. The phrase "dwelling on old history" was particularly revealing because it demonstrated Jessica's fundamental misunderstanding of how family relationships actually work. She viewed family history and traditions as burdens to be minimized rather than as the foundation that had created the love and stability that made our family worth joining in the first place. But Jessica's interruption also provided exactly the kind of public demonstration of her disrespect that I had been waiting for. In front of a room full of guests, she had revealed her true attitude toward me and her belief that she had the authority to control my participation in family conversations. The mask was beginning to slip, and I could see that several family members were uncomfortable with Jessica's obvious rudeness. The formal dinner itself was a masterpiece of Jessica's approach to family entertaining, beautifully presented, professionally served, and completely lacking in the warmth and genuine connection that had always characterized Mitchell family celebrations. The expanded guest list and formal atmosphere had transformed our traditional family gathering into a social performance, where everyone was more focused on making good impressions than on actually enjoying each other's company. But the most revealing aspect of Jessica's dinner party was her obvious frustration with family members, who continued to treat me with the respect and affection that had always characterized our relationships. Despite her attempts to marginalize me and establish herself as the family's center of attention, family members naturally gravitated toward me for conversation and continued to seek my input on family matters and personal concerns. The breaking point came during the main course, when my granddaughter Emma sought my advice about a difficult situation with her college roommate. Emma had been struggling with conflicts in her dormitory and wanted guidance about how to handle interpersonal challenges without creating bigger problems for herself or her living situation. "Grandma Eleanor, I've been having some problems with my roommate, and I was wondering if you had any advice about how to handle conflicts without making things worse," Emma said, turning to me with the kind of trust and affection that had always characterized our relationship. I was just beginning to respond to Emma's request when Jessica made the decision that would destroy her life and expose every secret she had been hiding. Standing up from her position at the head of the table, she addressed me with a level of condescension and disrespect that shocked even the guests who didn't know our family dynamics. "Eleanor, I think this would be a good time for you to keep quiet and let the adults handle important conversations," Jessica announced in a voice that carried clearly throughout the dining room. "Emma doesn't need old-fashioned advice about problems that require contemporary solutions. And I think it would be better if you understood that your input isn't needed or wanted during serious family discussions." The phrase "keep quiet and let the adults handle important conversations" was the moment when Jessica revealed her true character to everyone present. In front of a room full of family members and guests, she had treated me like a child who needed to be silenced and controlled, rather than a respected family member who deserved consideration and courtesy. The immediate response from the family was shock and horror at Jessica's public display of disrespect. The artificial conversation that had characterized the evening stopped completely, as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Even Jessica's invited guests looked uncomfortable with her obvious cruelty toward an elderly family member who had been nothing but kind and gracious throughout the evening. But Jessica's mistake wasn't just the public display of disrespect. It was her complete failure to understand that she had just given me permission to stop protecting her and everyone else from the consequences of their own behavior. By demanding that I keep quiet and dismissing my contributions as unwanted, Jessica had released me from any obligation to continue maintaining the family secrets that had kept everyone safe from the consequences of their own actions. I stood up slowly from my place at the table, maintaining the dignified composure that had served me well for 73 years, and looked directly at Jessica with the kind of calm certainty that comes from absolute moral authority and comprehensive knowledge of the truth. "Well, Jessica," I said in a voice that was quiet but carried clearly throughout the now silent dining room, "if you really want me to keep quiet about family matters, perhaps I should start by keeping quiet about your first marriage and the real reason you moved to Seattle after your divorce." The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized that I knew about the secret she had been hiding from Robert and the family for over 6 years. Her carefully constructed facade of perfection and sophisticated wisdom was about to crumble, and she knew it. "What are you talking about?" Jessica stammered, but her voice betrayed her panic and guilt. Everyone in the room could see that I had struck a nerve, and that Jessica's shocked reaction confirmed the accuracy of my revelation. "I'm talking about your marriage to David Chen in Phoenix, which ended in divorce in 2015 when you discovered his affair with your best friend," I continued, my voice remaining calm and factual. "I'm talking about the fact that you lied to Robert about your relationship history and created a completely false narrative about your background to make yourself seem more desirable as a marriage partner." Robert's face went white as he processed the information about his wife's deception. The woman he had trusted and loved for 6 years had been lying to him about something as fundamental as her previous marriage experience. The revelation created immediate questions about what else Jessica had been hiding and whether their entire relationship had been built on deception. But Jessica's secret about her hidden divorce was just the beginning of what I was prepared to reveal. I had spent 3 days planning the most effective approach for exposing the truth about everyone's secrets, and I had decided that the most devastating strategy would be to create a cascade of revelations that would expose the hypocrisy and hidden problems that had been festering beneath the surface of our family's polite interactions. "But if we're going to stop keeping quiet about family secrets," I continued, looking around the table at the assembled family members, "perhaps we should also discuss Robert's gambling addiction and the $40,000 he's lost on online poker games over the past 2 years." Quote. Robert's shocked expression confirmed the accuracy of my revelation, and Jessica's face showed her horror at discovering that her husband had been hiding a major financial and personal problem from her throughout their marriage. The gambling addiction explained many of the financial pressures and relationship tensions that had been affecting their marriage, and it revealed that Robert had been just as capable of deception and secret-keeping as his wife. "Robert, is this true?" Jessica demanded, her voice shaking with anger and betrayal. But Robert's inability to deny the accusation confirmed that I had exposed another devastating family secret that would change everything about their relationship and their future together. I continued my systematic revelation of family secrets, each one carefully chosen to maximize the impact and create the kind of comprehensive destruction that would ensure Jessica never again felt confident enough to dismiss or disrespect anyone in our family. "And while we're being honest about family finances," I said, turning to my daughter Sarah, "perhaps we should discuss the $18,000 you've embezzled from your employer to pay for Emma's legal expenses and rehabilitation programs." Sarah's face went ashen as she realized that I knew about her financial crimes and was prepared to expose them in front of the entire family. Her theft had been motivated by desperation and love for her daughter, but it was still a serious crime that could result in prosecution and imprisonment if discovered by her employer. "Mom, please don't," Sarah whispered, but her plea only confirmed the accuracy of my revelation and demonstrated that I possessed comprehensive knowledge of everyone's most damaging secrets. I turned to my younger son, Michael, who had been watching the systematic destruction of family secrets with growing terror as he realized that his own devastating secret was about to be exposed. "And Michael," I said, looking directly at him, "I think your wife deserves to know about your 2-year affair with Jennifer Patterson, and the fact that you've been planning to leave your marriage as soon as your business partnership with her husband is dissolved." Michael's wife Lisa gasped in shock and horror as she processed the information about her husband's betrayal. The affair wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained relationship that had been ongoing for years, and the revelation that Michael had been planning to leave their marriage made it clear that his deception had been comprehensive and calculated. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come, and I had saved it for last to ensure that Jessica understood exactly what happened when someone pushed the wrong person too far. "And finally, Jessica," I said, turning back to the woman who had demanded that I keep quiet. I think everyone should know about the real reason you've been so desperate to control this family's image and maintain such a perfect facade. You've been hiding the fact that you're currently having an affair with your personal trainer, Marcus Rodriguez, and that you've been using our family gatherings to create alibis for your meetings with him. The revelation of Jessica's affair was the final piece of information that destroyed any remaining credibility or moral authority she might have possessed. After years of criticizing family members for their problems and positioning herself as the sophisticated voice of contemporary wisdom, Jessica had been revealed as someone whose own behavior was just as problematic and deceptive as anyone else's. The immediate aftermath of my systematic revelation of family secrets was chaos and devastation. Jessica's carefully planned dinner party had been transformed into a scene of family destruction, with relationships shattered, secrets exposed, and the carefully constructed facade of family harmony completely demolished. Robert stood up from the table and walked out of the house without saying a word, his marriage effectively ended by the revelation of mutual deception and betrayal. Jessica's invited guests made hasty excuses and left as quickly as possible, horrified by the family drama they had been forced to witness. But the most satisfying aspect of the evening's destruction was watching Jessica's complete collapse, as she realized that her years of disrespect and controlling behavior had created exactly the kind of comprehensive disaster that her image-obsessed approach to family relationships had been designed to prevent. "You've destroyed everything," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking with rage and devastation. "How could you do this to your own family?" "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior. You demanded that I keep quiet, and I decided that you were right. It was time to stop keeping quiet about the truth." The immediate consequences of the evening's revelations were swift and comprehensive. Robert filed for divorce within a week, citing Jessica's deception about her previous marriage and her affair as grounds for ending their relationship. The divorce proceedings revealed additional financial irregularities and deceptions that had been hidden throughout their marriage. Jessica's affair with her personal trainer became public knowledge, destroying her reputation within the community and eliminating any possibility of her maintaining the sophisticated image she had worked so hard to create. She was forced to move back to Phoenix, where she now works as a receptionist at a medical clinic, a dramatic fall from the social status she had spent years trying to achieve. Sarah's embezzlement was discovered by her employer following an anonymous tip, resulting in her termination and criminal charges that required her to make full restitution and complete community service. But the exposure of her financial crimes also led to her family receiving the support and counseling they needed to address the underlying problems that had created the crisis. Michael's affair ended his marriage and business partnership, but it also forced him to confront the character flaws and relationship patterns that had been creating problems throughout his adult life. The crisis ultimately led to personal growth and a more authentic approach to relationships. Robert's gambling addiction was finally addressed through professional counseling and support groups, allowing him to overcome the problem that had been destroying his financial security and personal relationships for years. But perhaps the most important consequence of the evening's revelations was the restoration of honesty and authentic communication within the Mitchell family. By eliminating the secrets and deceptions that had been creating tension and preventing genuine connection, the family was able to rebuild relationships based on truth rather than performance and image management. The destruction of Jessica's carefully constructed facade had revealed the importance of genuine character and authentic relationships over superficial sophistication and social climbing. The family learned that true strength comes from facing problems honestly and supporting each other through difficulties, rather than from maintaining perfect appearances and controlling other people's behavior. As for me, I returned to my role as the family's emotional anchor and informal counselor, but with a new understanding of the importance of setting boundaries and demanding respect. The evening had demonstrated that even the most patient and loyal person has limits, and that protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior isn't always the most loving or effective approach. The woman Jessica had tried to silence and dismiss had taught her the most important lesson of her life: never underestimate someone based on their appearance, and never assume that kindness and gentleness are signs of weakness or powerlessness. Sometimes the most dangerous person at the dinner table is the one who looks like they couldn't possibly hurt you, and sometimes the most devastating justice comes from simply telling the truth. Jessica had learned that demanding someone keep quiet can have consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings, especially when that person possesses the kind of comprehensive knowledge that can destroy carefully constructed lives in a single evening. The protection she had taken for granted was gone, and she had discovered exactly what happened when someone pushed the wrong person too far. The Mitchell family had been forever changed by the events of that Thanksgiving evening, but the changes ultimately led to stronger, more authentic relationships and a deeper understanding of the importance of honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's welfare. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating, and the family was better for having faced it together. Sometimes justice comes not from elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations, but from simply refusing to protect people from the consequences of their own behavior. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect and cruelty is to tell the truth and let people face the reality of who they really are beneath their carefully constructed facades. The evening Jessica Rodriguez Mitchell learned to never underestimate the power of a woman who had been listening, watching, and remembering everything for 15 years was the beginning of the end of her carefully constructed life, and the beginning of her education about the real consequences of treating people with cruelty and disrespect. The dinner table had been set for justice, and justice had been served with the precision and completeness that only comes from someone who understands that the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.